I caught my dad telling my brother, "Your brother? He's not getting a single thing." Mom was smiling. So I moved every dollar that night. Hey, Reddit. So my parents literally toasted to cutting me out of the family while I stood outside the kitchen door listening. Then they tried to frame me for the crimes they committed. Buckle up because this is about to be the wildest family betrayal story you've read all week. So I, 28 male, have been the invisible kid in my family my entire life. My younger brother Kevin, 25 male, has always been treated like he's God's gift to humanity, while I'm basically just the background character nobody gives a crap about. The favoritism in our house is so obvious, it would make a sitcom writer blush. I'm not even exaggerating. This is some straight-up golden child versus scapegoat type situation that would make a family therapist write an entire textbook. Let me break this down for you guys. Since I turned 18, I've been expected to contribute to the family business, while Kevin just existed. Yeah, you read that right. I worked 60-hour weeks growing Hartwell restorations, from a $2 million operation to $15 million, and Kevin showed up maybe twice a year for photo ops. Meanwhile, he got praised for breathing, while I got told my work was adequate. Adequate. I literally tripled the company's revenue, and that's the word they chose. The double standards don't stop there. When I graduated high school with honors while working part-time at the shop, my parents said, "That's nice," and went back to planning Kevin's graduation party, forgetting a 2.4 GPA after 5 years because he failed 2 classes. When I brought in our biggest client ever, the Jacobson Museum contract worth $3 million over 5 years, Dad told Kevin. Great job on the networking at the next board meeting. Kevin had literally never met anyone from that museum. I did all the work. I made all the calls. I drove 3 hours each way for the meetings. He got all the credit. I still remember this one time in high school when I made the honor roll every single semester for 4 years straight. You know what my parents did to celebrate? Nothing. Literally nothing. Meanwhile, Kevin got a car for passing his driver's test on the 3rd try. A brand new car. Because apparently operating a vehicle at a basic competency level after multiple failures deserves a $15,000 reward. But academic excellence deserves a, "That's nice, dear." Christmas was always a complete joke in our house too. Kevin's pile of presents would be stacked to the ceiling. All the latest gaming systems, best clothes, whatever he'd been whining about for the past 6 months. My pile? Whatever was on clearance, maybe a flannel shirt if I was lucky, and occasionally something actually useful for my projects. Practical gifts, Mom would say with this smug look like she deserved a medal for buying me work gloves while Kevin unwrapped a new laptop. The thing is, Kevin was just as bad as my parents in his own way. Entitled, selfish, smug about his golden child status. He'd rub it in my face constantly. "Mom said yes to me, but she'd probably say no to you." He'd smirk when we were kids. Or he'd accidentally break my stuff and then act all innocent when I got mad. One time he took my restored vintage radio, something I'd spent 6 months fixing, and just left it out in the rain. When I got upset, my parents told me I needed to be less materialistic. Meanwhile, when I accidentally stepped on Kevin's shoelace and he tripped, I was grounded for a week. I figured out pretty early that nobody in this family had my back except me. So I shut up, kept my head down, and worked my butt off. Got my first real job at the shop when I was 16. Saved every penny. Started learning everything I could about running the business. Didn't need their validation anyway. Or so I told myself every night when I heard them laughing with Kevin downstairs while I was alone in my room. My room was always the smallest one in the house, by the way. The one at the end of the hall that used to be a storage closet before they converted it for me. Kevin's room was twice the size with its own bathroom. When I asked about switching when I was 13, Mom told me I should be grateful to have a room at all. That pretty much summed up my entire childhood experience. Dad would take Kevin to baseball games, to car shows, to all the father-son stuff you see in movies. I'd ask to come along sometimes. The answer was always, "Next time, buddy," or "This is a Kevin thing." Next time never came. There was no Nate thing. There was just me in the garage, teaching myself how to fix things because nobody else was going to teach me. But here's where my grandpa comes into the story. And this is important. Grandpa Ray was the only one who ever really saw me. Ironically, he was my dad's father. Former army mechanic and old-school car guy who could strip an engine blindfolded if he had to. The man was a legend with anything mechanical. While my parents were busy cheering at Kevin's mediocre baseball games or obsessing over his social life, I'd be at Grandpa's garage learning how to rebuild carburetors and replace transmissions. Those were the only days I actually felt like someone gave a damn about me. "You got something special in those hands, boy." he'd tell me while we worked side by side on whatever project he had going. Your dad never had the patience for this stuff. Always too busy chasing the next promotion, the next big deal. He'd shake his head like he couldn't quite figure out where he went wrong with his son. Grandpa saw right through my parents' favoritism. This one time when I was 15, my parents forgot my birthday. Like, completely forgot. Not, we'll celebrate later, forgot. Actually forgot that March 15th was a day that existed and had meaning. They remembered that Kevin had a party to go to that day, and the whole family had to drive him there. My mom actually said, "Oh, it's your birthday tomorrow, isn't it? We'll celebrate next weekend." They didn't even get me a cake. Next weekend never came either. Just never mentioned again. When Grandpa found out about the birthday thing, he was livid. Showed up at our house that night with a beautiful set of precision tools I'd been eyeing for months at the hardware store. "Happy birthday, kiddo," he said, loud enough for my parents to hear from the kitchen. Some things are worth celebrating properly. The look on my dad's face was priceless. Half embarrassed, half annoyed that his own father was calling him out. Every Christmas when I'd open those practical gifts from my parents, socks, school supplies, whatever, Grandpa would sneak me something real. Quality tools mostly, stuff I still use today. One year my parents actually complained about it. My mom had the nerve to say, "He doesn't need to be spoiled, Joe." Like a decent set of wrenches was equivalent to the new gaming console Kevin had just unwrapped. Grandpa just stared her down like she was speaking nonsense. Recognizing talent ain't spoiling. It's investing. Then he winked at me. When I was 20, Grandpa got diagnosed with Parkinson's. Terrible news, obviously. He couldn't work on cars anymore. Couldn't do the things that made him feel alive. I spent as much time with him as I could, even when my parents complained that I was neglecting family obligations, meaning I wasn't available to cover for Kevin's constant absences at the shop. Before Grandpa passed 3 years ago, he pulled me aside during one of my visits. His hands were shaking bad by then, but his eyes were still sharp. "Don't trust your father," he told me. "I've seen how he looks at that company, like it's just money waiting to be spent. Promise me you'll protect what we built." I promised. I didn't know then how important that promise would become. Now here's the part you need to understand about Hartwell Restorations. Grandpa started the company in 1965 with nothing but a single bay garage and a talent for making old cars run like new. By the time he couldn't work anymore, it had grown to a 16-bay facility with 31 employees, contracts with museums and collectors across 3 states, and a reputation for quality that took decades to build. When Grandpa got too sick to run things, my dad took over, and that's when things started to change. Not obviously at first, just little things. Equipment orders that didn't quite add up, vendors I'd never heard of, expenses that seemed higher than they should be. I flagged some of it to my dad, and he told me to focus on my job and stop playing accountant. So I did. Biggest mistake I ever made. For the next 3 years, I buried myself in the actual work while my parents and Kevin handled the business side. I rebuilt engines, I restored classics, I trained new guys, I brought in clients and managed relationships. The company kept growing, and I told myself that meant everything was fine. I was so stupid. Last month, everything changed. I was working late at the shop, which wasn't unusual. I practically lived there sometimes, especially when we had big projects coming due. What was unusual was hearing voices coming from the kitchen area of the office. My parents and Kevin, who almost never showed up after hours. Kevin barely showed up during regular hours. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop at first, just wanted to grab a coffee before getting back to the Henderson project. But then I heard my name, and something made me stop. I pressed my ear against the door. Dad's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Kevin gets everything. The house, the business, the investments, all the offshore accounts. Nate? He's not getting a single thing." Mom's laughter followed. Sharp, cruel. The kind of laugh that tells you exactly where you stand in a family. He never deserved it anyway. Always so eager to please. Like a stray dog begging for scraps. Did you see how hard he worked on that Henderson estimate? Almost felt bad for him. My hands started trembling as I watched them clink their glasses through the crack in the door. 28 years of being their son. 28 years of staying late, covering Kevin's phantom shifts, taking the blame for his screw-ups, being the reliable workhorse who never complained. And they'd already written me out of existence like I was some clerical error they finally got around to fixing. But that wasn't even the worst part. Not even close. "The bankruptcy filing is ready," Dad continued. "We file Friday. By Monday, Hartwell Restorations will be gutted. The money will be offshore, and will be set for life. I'm thinking Costa Rica. They don't extradite." I almost stopped breathing. Bankruptcy? Offshore money? What the hell was he talking about? What about the employees? Kevin asked. Not with concern, with idle curiosity, like he was asking about the weather. They should have saved more, Mom said dismissively. Not our problem. That's 31 people who should have planned better for their futures. And the vendors? Kevin again. They'll get pennies on the dollar in the bankruptcy proceedings, Dad said with a shrug I could hear in his voice. Maybe nothing. That's business. 31 employees. Families who'd worked alongside me for years. Robert, who worked double shifts to pay for his wife's cancer treatments. James, who'd been with the company since before I was born. Angela, who was putting 2 kids through college on her salary. They were going to destroy all of them and just walk away. I had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling over. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. What about Nate? Kevin asked. He's been asking questions about the Henderson account discrepancies. Noticed some numbers didn't add up. There was a pause. Then Dad spoke again, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. Don't worry about Nate. After Friday, he won't be able to cause any problems. I've already got the termination letter ready. We'll say he was skimming from the parts inventory. Been doing it for years. Easy to prove with some creative documentation. Will anyone believe that? Kevin sounded skeptical. Who's going to question it? Mom laughed. The adopted kid versus the real family. Please, we've been building this narrative for years. Nate the screw-up. Nate who can't manage money. Nate who's jealous of his successful brother. By the time we're done, everyone will believe he was stealing from his own grandfather's company. Adopted. The word hit me like a physical blow. You think he ever suspected? Kevin asked. That he's adopted? Dad snorted. Please. The kid's so desperate for our approval he'd believe anything we told him. We've been using him for free labor for a decade. He never questioned why we treat Kevin differently because he's too pathetic to consider the obvious answer. They all laughed, all 3 of them, laughing at me, at how stupid I was, at how easily they'd manipulated me for my entire life. I don't remember walking back to my room that night. Don't remember much of anything except lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. Adopted. They were going to frame me. They were going to destroy 31 families. And they'd been planning it for years. But as the shock wore off, something else took its place. Not sadness, not self-pity, anger, cold, focused anger. They thought I was pathetic. They thought I was stupid. They thought I'd roll over and take whatever they decided to dish out, same as I'd been doing my whole life. They had no idea who they were dealing with. See, here's what they didn't know. Last month, Dad had knee surgery. Nothing serious, but he needed someone to handle business matters while he recovered. So he gave me power of attorney, full access to every account, every document, every system in the company. And in the chaos of his return to work, nobody had remembered to revoke it. The grandfather clock chimed midnight as I slipped into Dad's study. My hands shook as I pulled open the mahogany drawer where he kept his important documents. What I found confirmed everything I'd overheard, and more. Kevin Hartwell. Kevin Hartwell. Kevin Hartwell. Every document, every deed, every investment account bore my brother's name. The company I'd built with my own hands? Kevin Hartwell. Sole beneficiary. The house where I'd grown up? Kevin Hartwell. Future owner. Even the equipment I'd personally selected and maintained was listed as Kevin's property. But the financial records were what really mattered. And they were damning. Over the past 18 months, my parents had been systematically draining Hartwell restorations. I traced every transaction, every shell company, every offshore wire transfer. Ghost employees on payroll. People who didn't exist drawing salaries that went straight to hidden accounts. Nearly 400,000 in the last year alone. Inflated vendor contracts with kickbacks funneled to companies my dad secretly controlled. Another 2 million. Equipment purchases that were billed twice, 3 times, to different budget categories. The same diagnostic computer supposedly bought 6 times. Fake insurance claims. Phantom repairs. Client deposits that never made it to the actual accounts. $8 million. They'd stolen $8 million from the company Grandpa built, and they were planning to take the rest before declaring bankruptcy. And tucked behind all those financial documents was a manila folder labeled Confidential 1999. Inside was my adoption certificate, Nathan Hartwell, adopted by Richard and Gloria Hartwell. Date of adoption, March 15th, 1999. I was 3 years old when they took me in, and they'd never told me. Not once in 25 years. I photographed everything, every document, every email on the shared drive detailing their scheme, every wire transfer confirmation, every forged invoice. Then I found the emails about me specifically. Nate's getting suspicious. He asked about the Henderson account discrepancies. Don't worry. I've already prepared the documentation to frame him. Backdated receipts, forged signatures on expense reports. After Friday, Nate will be facing embezzlement charges while we're sipping cocktails on the beach. Perfect. The ungrateful little charity case finally gets what he deserves. Charity case. That's what they thought of me. The son they'd adopted and then spent 25 years resenting for not being their real child. I didn't sleep that night. I had too much to do. The next morning, I called my buddy Joel. We'd been friends since high school, stayed close through the years even when my family tried to isolate me. He'd become a corporate attorney. Smart guy, good instincts, and most importantly, someone I could trust. I need to meet you, I told him. It's urgent. And bring whatever paperwork you need to set up a protective trust. When I showed Joel everything, the fraud evidence, the bankruptcy plan, the scheme to frame me, the adoption certificate, his face went through about 17 different emotions in 30 seconds. Nate, he said slowly, setting down the papers. This is massive. We're talking federal crimes here. Wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. They're looking at serious prison time. I know. Your whole family, your parents, your brother, they could all go to prison for decades. I know that too. He studied my face for a long moment. What do you want to do? I looked him straight in the eye. I want to save the company, protect the employees, and make sure my family faces consequences for what they've done. Joel nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. Then we've got about 60 hours before they file that bankruptcy. Let's get to work. Over the next 48 hours, we executed a plan that would have made Grandpa proud. First, we secured the assets. Using my still valid power of attorney, I transferred $12 million, every liquid asset the company had, into a protected trust account specifically structured to benefit creditors and employees. Completely legal. I was acting to protect stakeholders from fraudulent bankruptcy proceedings. That's not just legal, it's a fiduciary responsibility. Joel walked me through every step, made sure every document was properly filed, every transfer properly authorized. We weren't cutting corners. We weren't doing anything shady. We were doing exactly what the law requires when you discover corporate fraud. Second, Joel flagged the suspicious transactions to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Not anonymous this time. We went in person, sat down with an agent, and laid out everything I'd found. Turns out they'd already been watching some of my parents' offshore accounts from a separate investigation. My documentation was the missing piece they needed. Third, and this was the part that really mattered to me, we reached out to the senior employees. I met them at a diner 5 miles from the shop. Neutral territory. James McCready, who'd been with the company 30 years. Angela Torres, who ran our parts department like a general. Dave Kowalski, head of our paint division. Susan Walsh, office manager who'd taught me the business side when I was just starting out. And Robert Simmons, our night security guard who'd let me into the building at 2 in the morning without asking questions. They already knew something was wrong. Turns out they'd been documenting their own suspicions for months. Strange transactions they couldn't explain. Equipment that was supposed to arrive but never did. Ghost employees they'd never seen. They just didn't know who to trust. When I showed them what I'd found, when I told them about the bankruptcy plan, about the offshore accounts, about the 31 families my parents were planning to destroy, the room went silent. Then, James McCready, this grizzled old mechanic who'd known me since I was a teenager, looked me dead in the eye. Your grandfather hired me when I was 19 years old, he said. Gave me a chance when no one else would. Taught me everything I know. I watched him build this company from nothing, and I'll be damned if I let his son destroy it. One by one, they all pledged their support. Angela with her spreadsheets of suspicious transactions. Dave with records of equipment that existed on paper, but never in the shop. Susan with copies of forged signatures she'd noticed, but been too afraid to report. Robert with security footage that showed Kevin removing files late at night. For the first time in my life, I had an army at my back. People who actually gave a crap. People who saw my value when my own parents never could. The explosion came Thursday morning. I was in the break room, pretending to read a magazine and nursing my third coffee, when Kevin burst through the door. His designer suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. The golden boy had clearly had a rough morning. You. He pointed at me. What did you do? I looked up calmly. Good morning to you too, Kevin. Coffee? Don't play games with me. The accounts are frozen. The transfers won't go through. Dad's been on the phone with the bank for 2 hours, and they keep saying something about a trust protection order. What did you do? I set down my magazine and took a slow sip of coffee. Sounds like someone's been managing the company's assets. Responsibly. You know, the thing you were supposed to be doing all these years while you were actually just showing up for photo ops. His face went purple. You had no right. Actually, I had power of attorney, full legal authority. And when I noticed some, let's call them irregularities, in the company finances, to the tune of about $8 million, I took steps to protect the creditors and employees. You're welcome. That's when my parents appeared in the doorway. Mom's face was pale, her perfect makeup slightly smudged, like she'd been crying or maybe just not sleeping. Dad looked like he was one blood pressure point away from a stroke. Nathan, Dad said, using my full name in that tone he reserves for serious conversations. We need to talk. In my office. Now. So we talked. If you can call it that. The three of them sat on one side of Dad's massive desk, like it was a tribunal. Kevin on the left, Mom on the right, Dad in the center like some kind of judge. I sat across from them, completely calm. I'd been preparing for this moment for 48 hours. They'd been lying to me for 28 years. I knew their weaknesses, their tells, their patterns. For the first time in my life, I had the advantage. What the hell do you think you're doing? Dad demanded. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck. The look he used to give me when I was a kid, and he wanted me to back down. I didn't back down anymore. Protecting Hartwell Restorations, I said simply. From fraud. The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. You don't know what you're talking about, Mom said, but her voice cracked. Don't I? I pulled out my phone and started reading. Ghost invoices paid to Cayman Islands accounts. Double-billed equipment purchases. Contracts inflated by 20% with the excess disappearing offshore. Ghost employees drawing salaries for work they never did because they don't exist. A bankruptcy filing scheduled for tomorrow that would destroy 31 families while you three sail off to Costa Rica. Nobody moved. And my personal favorite, I continued, watching their faces. The plan to frame me for embezzlement when I got too close to the truth. Really? Backdated receipts and forged expense reports? You thought that would hold up to investigation? Kevin lunged at me across the desk. I stepped aside and he sprawled onto the floor, knocking over Dad's lamp. Careful, I said, not even raising my voice. Wouldn't want to add assault to your list of federal charges. Although honestly, at this point, what's one more? How dare you? Mom hissed. After everything we've done for you. We took you in when nobody wanted you. We gave you a home, a family. And this is how you repay us? I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. A family? You mean the family that made me pay rent while Kevin lived free? The family that gave him credit for my work? The family that forgot my birthdays and threw parties when Kevin passed his driver's test on the third try? That family? You were always so ungrateful, Dad snarled. Do you know how much it cost to raise you? To feed you? To put a roof over your head? You owe us everything. What I owe, I said, standing up, is to the 31 employees you were planning to betray, to the vendors you were going to stiff, to Grandpa's legacy that you were going to destroy for a beach house in Costa Rica. That's who I owe, not you. Never you. Dad's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and went gray. Who is it? Mom asked. Unknown number. He answered it, and I watched his face change as he listened. When he hung up, his hand was shaking. That was the FBI, he said. They want to talk to all of us. They're sending agents now. I smiled. I know. I called them 2 days ago. The next few hours were the most satisfying of my entire life. FBI agents swarmed the building. They had warrants for everything. Financial records, computers, files, the works. They'd been building a case even before my documentation arrived, but they hadn't had enough evidence to move forward. My records were the missing piece. Kevin was the first to be arrested. They found him trying to shred documents in the back office. He started crying when they put the cuffs on, blubbering about how it wasn't his idea, how Mom and Dad made him do it. Classic Kevin, never taking responsibility for anything. Mom went next. She tried the, I'm just a wife. I didn't know anything about the business defense until they showed her the emails where she discussed which employees to fire first and how to maximize the pain for those ungrateful workers. Dad was last. He tried to bluff his way through it, playing the successful businessman unfairly targeted. That lasted until they started listing the charges. Wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy, attempted fraud. The list went on. He stopped in front of me on his way out, hands cuffed behind his back. We raised you, he said. We gave you everything. You gave me scraps, I replied. And then you tried to take even those away. Grandpa built this company on integrity. You destroyed it with greed. The difference between us is that I actually learned something from him. You'll regret this, he said, and there was real venom in his voice. Blood is thicker than water, boy. Family is everything. You're right, I said. Family is everything. That's why I'm protecting the family that actually matters. The 31 people who built this company while you were busy stealing from it. They loaded him into the car. I never saw him outside a courtroom again. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Remember how I mentioned Grandpa's will? Turns out there was more to it than anyone knew. 2 days after the arrests, I got a call from Grandpa's lawyer, the one who'd handled his estate. He asked me to come to his office for an urgent matter. Turns out, Grandpa had suspected his son's greed for years. He'd watched how my parents treated me. He'd seen the signs of financial manipulation, even before he got sick. And he'd prepared. There was a codicil to the will, a secret addition that only activated under specific circumstances. Namely, if the company faced bankruptcy proceedings, or if any member of the family faced criminal charges related to fraud. The codicil stated that in that event, all ownership of Hartwell Restorations would transfer immediately to me. Your grandfather came to me 5 years ago, the lawyer explained. He knew what his son was capable of. He wanted to make sure the company he'd built would survive, and he wanted to make sure you'd be the one to save it. He handed me a letter. Grandpa's handwriting, shaky but determined. My dearest Nathan, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. My son has chosen greed over honor, and Hartwell Restorations faces its darkest hour. I've watched you grow from that scared little boy your Aunt Patricia brought to our door into a man of integrity and strength. Blood doesn't make family, son. Character does. You've shown more dedication to our legacy than William ever did. Save our company. Save our people. Be the Hartwell I always knew you could be. All my love. Grandpa Ray. I'm not going to lie. I had to step out for a minute when I read that. The trial took 3 months. Federal court, packed galleries, daily news coverage. The evidence was overwhelming. Between my documentation, the employee records, and the FBI's investigation, there was no way out. I testified on the second day, walked into that courtroom and sat 10 feet from the people who'd raised me. Mom wouldn't look at me. Dad glared like he could burn holes through my skull. Kevin just looked broken, like a child who'd finally learned that actions have consequences. I told the jury everything. The fraud I'd discovered, the plan to frame me, the bankruptcy scheme that would have destroyed 31 families, the adoption I'd never known about, and how they'd used it as justification for treating me as less than human for my entire life. When Mom's lawyer tried to discredit me, called me a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, and suggested I'd fabricated evidence, the prosecutor showed the jury the emails. The ungrateful little charity case finally gets what he deserves. He's so pathetic he'd believe anything we told him. After Friday, Nate will be facing embezzlement charges while we're sipping cocktails on the beach. That pretty much ended that defense. Dad got 12 years. Mom got 8, Kevin got 10, plus an additional 2 for obstruction when he tried to destroy evidence after his initial arrest. He'd actually attempted to wipe the company's servers before the FBI could copy them. Didn't realize we had off-site backups. That I'd set up 2 years earlier, because I was apparently the only person in that company who actually planned for emergencies. Frank DeLuca, my dad's business partner who'd helped facilitate the offshore transfers, flipped on everyone and got 5 years. Last I heard, his wife divorced him, and his kids won't return his calls. But the real victory wasn't watching them get sentenced. It was what happened to Hartwell Restorations. With controlling interest now legally mine thanks to Grandpa's codicil, I had a choice. I could run the company myself, cash out and disappear with the money, or do something different. I chose door number 3. We converted Hartwell Restorations to an employee-owned company. The 31 workers who would have lost everything instead became part owners of a business worth $15 million. I'll never forget the day we signed the papers. James McCready, who'd been with the company for 30 years, sat at that conference table and stared at his shares like he couldn't believe they were real. First time I've ever owned anything of real value, he said, his voice rough. First time in my whole life. Angela Torres used her equity stake to finally pay off her kids' student loans. Dave Kowalski took a sabbatical, his first real vacation in 15 years, and came back energized and full of new ideas. Susan Walsh got promoted to CFO because nobody knows the company finances better than she does. And Robert Simmons, the night security guard who let me into the building at 2 in the morning without asking questions, he used his shares to finally get his wife the cancer treatment she needed. The treatment that wasn't covered by insurance. The treatment he'd been working double shifts for 3 years trying to afford. His daughter Maria graduated from state last month, honors degree in accounting. She works in our finance department now, making sure what my parents did can never happen again. As for me, I kept a small ownership stake, but stepped back from day-to-day operations. The company's in good hands with people who actually care about it. People who earned their positions through hard work, not nepotism. I used part of my share to find my biological family, hired someone to track down my records, trace my history, figure out where I actually came from. My birth mother, Caroline, passed away when I was 3 years old. That part was true. But her sister, my Aunt Patricia, had been searching for me for 20 years. She'd sent letters to the Hartwell house every year on my birthday, cards at Christmas, photos of my mother, of my grandparents, of the family I never knew I had. The Hartwells threw them all away. 20 years of letters. Gone. When Patricia and I finally met, I almost couldn't believe it. She looked like me. Same eyes, same stubborn chin, same way of standing like we're ready for whatever comes next. She told me about my mother. Caroline was 22 when she had me. Poor, working 2 jobs, no support system. She thought giving me to the Hartwells would give me a better life. They seemed successful, stable, like good people. She didn't know what they really were. Nobody did. Patricia has pictures now of my mother holding me as a baby, of my grandparents who passed before they could know I existed, of a family that wanted me. Update, 6 months later. Legacy Restorations just posted its best quarter in company history. Revenue up 23%. We got written up in 3 industry publications as a model for employee ownership. But here's the real update you guys want to hear about. Last Tuesday, I got a call from Agent Martinez at the FBI. Turns out my parents had been trying to run a scheme from inside prison. They'd convinced some old business associate to help them hide assets the feds had missed during the initial investigation. A storage unit in Nevada with about $200,000 in cash and some bearer bonds Grandpa had bought back in the 80s. The associate got cold feet and contacted the authorities. Now my parents are facing additional charges. Dad's looking at another 5 to 8 years tacked onto his sentence. Mom's facing 3 to 5. Kevin tried to cut a deal by testifying against them again. The prosecutor laughed him out of the room. Apparently, my parents made me do it doesn't work twice. But wait, it gets better. Remember Frank DeLuca, Dad's business partner who flipped on everyone? He got released early for good behavior last month. 2 days after he got out, he showed up at Legacy Restorations asking for a job. James McCready was the one who met him at the door. Told him we don't hire people who steal from their employees. Frank tried to argue that he'd paid his debt to society. James reminded him that Maria Simmons had to defer college for 2 years because of what he helped do to her father's pension. Frank left and hasn't been back. 3 weeks ago, I got a certified letter from a law firm in Chicago. Turns out my birth mother had a life insurance policy that the Hartwells had been collecting on for 25 years. They'd forged documents to make themselves the beneficiaries after Caroline died. Patricia and I are suing to recover the funds. Our lawyer says it's an open and shut case. The Hartwells are going to have to pay back every penny plus interest. We're donating it all to the Caroline Chen Memorial Fund. Speaking of which, we awarded our first 2 scholarships last week. A kid named Marcus from the South Side who wants to be a diesel mechanic, and a girl named Jenny, whose dad worked at Legacy for 15 years before he passed. Full rides for both of them. Trade school, tools, living expenses, everything. Patricia cried when we handed out the certificates. So did I, honestly. Oh, and one more thing. Last month, I was going through some of Grandpa's old papers that Patricia had saved. Found a letter he wrote to my birth mother back in 1999, right after the adoption. He'd tried to contact her, tried to make sure she was okay, that she knew I was being taken care of. The Hartwells intercepted the letter and never sent it. But Grandpa kept a copy. In it, he promised Caroline that he'd watch over me, that he'd make sure I grew up knowing I was valued, that he'd protect me from his son if it ever came to that. He kept that promise. Even from the grave, he kept it. Final update. Someone asked what happened to the house I grew up in. The feds seized it as part of the asset forfeiture. It went to auction last month. I bought it. Not to live in. God, no. Too many bad memories in those walls. I donated it to a nonprofit that provides transitional housing for young adults aging out of foster care. Kids who aged out of the system with nowhere to go. Kids like I would have been if the Hartwells hadn't taken me in. The organization renamed it the Raymond Hartwell House, after my grandfather. There are 6 young people living there now, getting job training and life skills support, learning that they matter, that someone gives a damn about them. First resident moved in 3 weeks ago. Kid named Terrence, 19 years old, aged out of foster care with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes. He's working at Legacy now, learning to restore classic cars. James McCready took him under his wing. Last week, Terrence asked me why I did all this. Why I bought the house, started the scholarships, gave him a job. I told him the truth. Someone did it for me once. A grandfather who saw me when nobody else did. Now it's my turn to pass it on. He nodded like he understood. Then he went back to work on a 1969 Camaro we're restoring for a client in Texas. Good kid. Reminds me of myself at that age. Hungry, determined, ready to prove everyone wrong. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks. Stories.